February 26, 2024. 6 a.m. A mother walks down the hallway of her quiet Hendersonville home to wake her 15-year-old son for school. It's a routine she's done 1,000 times before. She opens his bedroom door, expecting to see him still asleep under the covers, his dark-rimmed glasses resting on the nightstand like always. But the bed is empty. Sebastian Rogers is gone. The doors to the house are locked from the inside. Every window is latched shut. There are no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone broke in during the night. His shoes are missing, but everything else remains untouched. His phone is still charging on his dresser. His wallet hasn't moved. The sunglasses he wore every single day to shield himself from a world that often felt too overwhelming are sitting exactly where he left them. For a boy who feared change more than anything, who needed routine like oxygen, who would never venture into unfamiliar territory alone. Especially not in the darkness, his disappearance makes absolutely no sense. If you're already hooked by this mystery, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because this case will leave you with more questions than answers. Today's story is about Sebastian Rogers, a 15-year-old boy from Hendersonville, Tennessee, who disappeared without a trace in the early morning hours of February 26, 2024. This isn't just another missing persons case. This is a mystery that defies logic, challenges investigators, and haunts everyone who hears it. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. It helps me understand where this story is reaching, and it reminds us all that cases like Sebastian's need as much visibility as possible. Your comment, your share, your voice, it all matters. Sebastian's story is complicated, emotional, and deeply troubling. But it's also a story that deserves to be heard. So let's talk about who Sebastian Rogers really was, and why his disappearance has left investigators completely baffled. How does a teenager vanish from a locked house without a trace? Where did Sebastian Rogers go? And more importantly, did he leave on his own, or did something far more sinister happen that cold February night? Sebastian Rogers wasn't like most 15-year-olds. While other teenagers were staying up late scrolling through TikTok, sneaking out to meet friends, or pushing boundaries with their parents, Sebastian lived in a world built on predictability and structure. He woke up at the same time every morning. He ate the same breakfast. He followed the same routines because that's what kept him safe, what kept his world from spinning out of control. Sebastian was diagnosed with autism at a young age, and for him, that diagnosis wasn't just a label. It shaped every aspect of his daily life. Loud noises didn't just bother him, they felt like physical assaults on his senses. Bright lights weren't uncomfortable, they were unbearable. Unexpected changes weren't minor inconveniences, they triggered genuine panic. This is why he wore his dark-rimmed glasses everywhere he went, why he slipped on sunglasses whenever the world felt too chaotic, too bright, too much. His family understood this. They built their entire household around giving Sebastian the consistency he desperately needed. They knew his triggers. They knew his fears. They knew that routine wasn't just a preference for Sebastian, it was survival. People who knew Sebastian described him as gentle and kind. At school, his teachers noticed his steady progress and genuine engagement in class. He wasn't a troublemaker. He didn't act out or cause disruptions. He was quiet, soft-spoken, and remarkably polite. Friends and neighbors knew him as the boy who always waved from the front porch, who smiled shyly when you said hello, who never caused any problems for anyone. But beyond his gentle demeanor, there was something else that defined Sebastian, his deep fascination with water. He loved the way it moved, the rhythmic sound it made, the calming effect it had on his anxious mind. Whether it was a pond, a lake, or even just the rain falling outside his window, water brought him peace in a world that often felt overwhelming. Here's what's crucial to understand about Sebastian: he wasn't a runner. He wasn't the type of kid who wandered off exploring or seeking adventure. For someone with his specific needs, unfamiliar places weren't exciting, they were terrifying. New environments didn't spark curiosity, they triggered fear and confusion. Sebastian found his safety in staying close to home, close to the people he trusted, close to the familiar spaces that made sense to him. There were no conflicts in his life. No secret online relationships. No hidden social media accounts where he was talking to strangers. His phone activity was minimal and closely monitored by his mother. He wasn't being bullied at school. He wasn't struggling with depression or expressing thoughts of running away. There were absolutely no warning signs, no red flags, nothing that suggested Sebastian was planning to leave or that he wanted to disappear. His daily life was beautifully simple and predictable. He'd wake up, get ready for school, come home, do his homework at the kitchen table, eat dinner with his family, and follow the same bedtime routine every single night. It was this predictability that kept Sebastian grounded, that allowed him to function in a world that could so easily overwhelm him. Understanding who Sebastian was, understanding his needs, his fears, his love of routine, is absolutely critical to understanding why his disappearance is so baffling. This wasn't a rebellious teenager sneaking out to meet friends. This wasn't a troubled kid running away from problems at home. This was a boy who needed structure and familiarity more than anything else in the world. So when Sebastian vanished in the middle of the night from his locked home, leaving behind everything that gave him comfort and security, it didn't just raise questions. It shattered every logical explanation anyone could come up with. Sebastian lived with his mother, Katie Proudfoot, and his stepfather, Chris Proudfoot, in a modest single-story home on Stafford Drive in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Hendersonville is a quiet suburban community located about 20 miles northeast of Nashville, nestled in Sumner County. It's the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name, where kids ride bikes through cul-de-sacs, and where Friday night high school football games are community events. Nothing truly terrible is supposed to happen in places like this. Katie had been Sebastian's constant advocate since his autism diagnosis. She knew his triggers inside and out. She understood what sounds would send him into sensory overload, what changes in routine would cause him distress, what he needed to feel safe and secure. She monitored his limited phone usage carefully, kept tabs on his minimal online activity, and maintained the strict daily routines that gave Sebastian the stability he required to navigate the world. There were no secret apps on his phone. No hidden conversations with strangers online. No suspicious contacts or troubling messages. Sebastian's digital footprint was completely transparent and unremarkable. Katie made sure of it. Chris Proudfoot, Sebastian's stepfather, had been part of the family for several years. By all accounts from neighbors, teachers, and family friends, their relationship was stable and free of conflict. There were no reports of tension in the household, no whispers of dysfunction or abuse, nothing that suggested the home environment was anything other than supportive and loving. The evening of February 25, 2024, was completely ordinary. The family shared dinner together at the kitchen table like they always did. Sebastian completed his homework under his mother's watchful supervision. They followed the exact same nighttime routine they'd followed hundreds of times before, the routine that Sebastian depended on to feel secure. Sebastian brushed his teeth, changed into his pajamas, and went to bed in his ground-floor bedroom. This was the same room he'd slept in for years, filled with his belongings, his comforts, the things that made him feel safe. Katie checked on him before she went to bed, just like she did every night. He was there, peacefully asleep in his bed, his dark-rimmed glasses resting on the nightstand beside him. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. There was absolutely nothing about that evening that suggested the nightmare that was about to unfold. Before we continue with what happened next, I want to pause for just a moment. If you're finding this case as mysterious and unsettling as I am, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps this story reach more people, and in cases like Sebastian's, visibility can make all the difference. Also, I'm curious, what's the weather like where you are right now? I know that might seem like a random question, but it helps me connect with you and understand who's watching from around the world. Drop a comment and let me know. Now, let's talk about the moment everything changed. The moment that turned an ordinary Monday morning into every parent's worst nightmare. Sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 26, 2024, Sebastian Rogers vanished from his home. When Katie walked into his bedroom that Monday morning to wake him for school, she expected to find him exactly where she'd left him the night before, asleep in his bed, safe and sound. Instead, she found an empty bed and a room that felt suddenly, terrifyingly wrong. Sebastian's shoes were missing. That was the first thing she noticed. But everything else? Everything else was still there. His phone was still plugged into the charger on his dresser, the screen dark and untouched. His wallet sat in its usual spot. The sunglasses he wore constantly to protect himself from sensory overload were sitting exactly where he'd placed them. Even his beloved dark-rimmed glasses, the ones he needed to see clearly, were still resting on his nightstand. Katie's heart dropped. She called out for him, searching the house room by room, hoping, praying, that he'd somehow just gotten up early, that he was in the bathroom or the kitchen or anywhere else in the house. But Sebastian was nowhere to be found. The doors were locked. All of them. Locked from the inside, just as they'd been when the family went to bed the night before. Every single window was latched shut. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no evidence that anyone had broken into the house during the night. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was out of place except for one devastating fact: Sebastian was gone. Katie immediately called 911. Within minutes, deputies from the Sumner County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Proudfoot home. Within hours, what started as a local missing persons case exploded into a massive search operation that would grip the entire state of Tennessee. Law enforcement moved quickly. They had to. Sebastian wasn't just any missing teenager, he was a vulnerable child with autism who needed routine and familiar surroundings to function. The thought of him alone, scared, and disoriented somewhere in the darkness was unbearable. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issued an endangered child alert. Sebastian's photo was distributed across the state and beyond, a thin, pale 15-year-old boy with dark-rimmed glasses and a gentle smile, last seen wearing gray sweatpants and a black sweatshirt. The alert went out to law enforcement agencies, news stations, social media platforms, and community organizations. Volunteers flooded into Hendersonville. Hundreds of people, neighbors, strangers, church groups, search and rescue teams fanned out across Sumner County looking for any trace of Sebastian. They searched the woods surrounding the neighborhood, combed through dense forest areas, checked abandoned buildings and sheds, knocked on doors, and distributed flyers with Sebastian's face on them. K-9 units were brought in, their noses pressed to the ground as they tried to pick up Sebastian's scent. The dogs tracked something initially, leading handlers away from the house and toward a wooded area, but the trail went cold. It just stopped, as if Sebastian had simply vanished into thin air. Helicopters circled overhead, their thermal imaging cameras scanning the landscape below for any sign of heat, any indication of a person hiding or lying injured somewhere in the wilderness. They flew over Old Hickory Lake, over Bledsoe Creek State Park, over miles and miles of Tennessee countryside. Dive teams were deployed to search nearby bodies of water. Investigators knew about Sebastian's fascination with water, knew it might draw him if he'd somehow wandered off in a confused or disoriented state. They searched ponds, creeks, drainage ditches, and sections of Old Hickory Lake. They found nothing. Days turned into weeks. The initial urgency and hope that comes with a fresh missing persons case began to fade into something darker, something heavier. Volunteers continued searching, but the crowds grew smaller. The helicopters stopped flying. The news cameras moved on to other stories. Weeks turned into months. Sebastian's face remained on missing persons posters throughout Tennessee. His case was shared thousands of times on social media. Tips continued to come in. Someone thought they saw a boy matching his description at a gas station 3 counties over. Another caller reported seeing someone who looked like Sebastian walking along a highway, but none of the leads panned out. Investigators were baffled. How does a teenage boy with autism, a boy who feared unfamiliar places and depended on routine, leave a locked house in the middle of the night without waking anyone? Where could he possibly have gone? And why would he leave without his phone, without his glasses, without any of the things that gave him comfort and security? The case that seemed so straightforward in those first terrifying hours became increasingly complex and mysterious as time went on. And the questions, the agonizing, unanswerable questions, only multiplied. This case absolutely needs visibility. If you haven't subscribed to the Case Files Collective yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because cases like Sebastian's don't solve themselves. They need people paying attention, people sharing information, people who care enough to keep his story alive. And here's something I want you to think about: do you believe Sebastian wandered off on his own, or do you think something else happened that night? Drop your theory in the comments below. Sometimes the smallest detail, the simplest observation, can be the piece that helps investigators see something they missed. Now let's talk about what investigators discovered as they dug deeper into this case. As the search for Sebastian stretched from days into weeks and then months, investigators faced a series of questions that seemed to have no logical answers. Every theory they explored led to more confusion, more contradictions, more dead ends. The central question haunted everyone involved: how does a 15-year-old boy with autism, a boy who feared change, who depended on routine, who would never voluntarily step into unfamiliar territory, leave a locked house in the middle of the night without waking anyone? Let's break down the theories investigators considered, because each one raises as many questions as it answers. The first theory was that Sebastian left voluntarily. Maybe he ran away. Maybe something was troubling him that his family didn't know about. Maybe he wanted to escape for reasons no one understood. But this theory falls apart almost immediately when you consider who Sebastian was. He had no history of running away. None. He'd never disappeared before, never threatened to leave, never expressed any desire to be anywhere other than home. There were no conflicts with his parents. No fights. No punishments. No reasons to flee. More importantly, Sebastian's autism made independent navigation nearly impossible, especially at night in unfamiliar areas. This wasn't a neurotypical teenager who could figure out how to get from point A to point B using street smarts and determination. Sebastian needed familiar routes, familiar landmarks, familiar routines. The idea that he would voluntarily walk out into the darkness, into territory he didn't know, without his phone or glasses, strains credibility to the breaking point. The second theory investigators had to consider was abduction. Maybe someone took Sebastian. Maybe someone broke into the house, or lured him out, or somehow convinced him to leave with them. But this theory has its own serious problems. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. No broken windows. No picked locks. No evidence that anyone had breached the home's security during the night. The doors were locked from the inside when Katie woke up that morning. So how would an abductor gain access to a locked house and remove a sleeping teenager without waking anyone else? And if Sebastian knew his abductor, if it was someone he trusted enough to leave with willingly, who could that person be? Investigators found no suspicious contacts on his phone, no concerning relationships, no one in his life who raised red flags. The third theory was that Sebastian experienced some kind of nocturnal episode. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe he had a moment of confusion or disorientation that led him to leave the house in an altered mental state. This theory has some merit. People with autism can experience sleep disturbances, and it's possible Sebastian woke up confused and simply walked out. But even if that's what happened, it raises an even more troubling question: where did he go? The terrain around Hendersonville is challenging. There are dense woods, steep ravines, bodies of water, rural properties that stretch for acres. If Sebastian wandered off in a confused state, especially at night, the likelihood of him getting lost, injured, or worse becomes tragically high. And yet, despite extensive searches involving hundreds of volunteers, K9 units, helicopters with thermal imaging, and dive teams, no trace of Sebastian has ever been found. Not a piece of clothing. Not a shoe. Not a single shred of physical evidence that he was ever in those woods or near that water. Which brings us to the fourth and most disturbing theory: foul play. Maybe something happened inside the home that night. Maybe someone close to Sebastian knows more than they're saying. As the months dragged on without answers, investigators began to scrutinize the family more closely. This is standard procedure in missing persons cases, especially when the disappearance happens from inside the home. Police interviewed Katie and Chris Proudfoot separately, multiple times. They analyzed phone records, searched digital communications, and looked for any inconsistencies in the family's statements. In June 2024, 4 months after Sebastian vanished, authorities executed search warrants at the Proudfoot home. They removed items for forensic analysis. They brought in cadaver dogs to search the property. They interviewed neighbors, relatives, and anyone who might have information about what happened that night. The investigation shifted. What began as a rescue mission, driven by hope that Sebastian would be found alive and brought home safely, evolved into something darker. The tone changed from hopeful to grim. From rescue to recovery. Investigators were now looking for evidence of what happened to Sebastian, not just where he might have gone. They were considering scenarios that no family ever wants to face. The possibility that Sebastian didn't leave on his own. The possibility that he never left the property at all. But even with all of this scrutiny, with all the forensic analysis and investigative resources poured into the case, no arrests have been made. No charges have been filed. No definitive answers have emerged. The Sebastian Rogers case remains open, active, and maddeningly unsolved. Nearly a year has passed since Sebastian Rogers disappeared, and his case has become one of Tennessee's most haunting unsolved mysteries. His family continues to plead for answers. They've maintained their public appeals, kept his face visible on social media, and cooperated with investigators every step of the way. The pain of not knowing, of living in this terrible limbo between hope and grief, is something no parent should ever have to endure. Volunteers still organize periodic searches, combing through areas that have been searched before, hoping that maybe this time they'll find something that was missed. Online communities dedicated to finding Sebastian share theories, analyze details, and keep his story circulating. People who've never met Sebastian or his family pray for answers, share his photos, and refuse to let his case fade into obscurity. But the truth remains heartbreakingly elusive. What happened to Sebastian Rogers? Did he walk out into that cold February darkness and succumb to the elements somewhere searchers haven't looked? Is he lost in terrain so dense, so remote, that even the most thorough searches couldn't find him? Was he taken by someone who knew his vulnerabilities, who understood his routines and his schedule, who knew exactly when and how to make him disappear without leaving a trace? Or is there something investigators haven't uncovered yet? A hidden clue buried in evidence they've already examined, a connection they haven't made, a secret that could break this case wide open. Sebastian Rogers wasn't just a headline or a statistic. He was a real person with hopes and fears and a future that should have been his to live. He was a son who loved routine, a brother who needed stability, a teenager who wore distinctive dark-rimmed glasses and found peace near water. He deserved to feel safe in his own home. He deserved to wake up on February 26th and live another ordinary day. He deserved to come home. Somewhere out there, someone knows something. Whether it's a small detail that seemed insignificant at the time, or crucial information being deliberately hidden, someone holds a piece of this puzzle. And until that piece surfaces, Sebastian's family will continue living in agonizing uncertainty, and this case will continue haunting everyone who hears it. Sebastian Rogers is still missing. His case remains open and active with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and they need your help. If you have any information about Sebastian's disappearance, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem, please contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation immediately. Sometimes the smallest detail is the one that breaks a case wide open. A neighbor who saw something unusual that night. Someone who remembers a conversation that didn't quite add up. A tip that seemed irrelevant at the time but might be the missing piece investigators need. Your information could be what brings Sebastian home. Your voice could be what finally gives his family the answers they've been desperately searching for. Now, if you made it this far, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for the Case Files Collective. Cases like Sebastian's need visibility. They need people who care, people who share, people who refuse to let these stories disappear into silence. Every subscription, every share, every comment helps keep these cases alive and in front of the people who might have answers. And speaking of comments, I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Sebastian Rogers? Do you believe he wandered off and got lost, or do you think something more sinister occurred that night? Drop your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going, because someone watching this video right now might know something that could help solve this case. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of a community that believes every missing person deserves to be found. Sebastian Rogers deserves answers. His family deserves closure. And somewhere out there, the truth is waiting to surface. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.